We see the topic of delegation of power. Delegation of power is when the executive is granted power by the legislature of its own functions. Okay, legislature is giving some powers to the executive. Delegated legislation refers to the power is granted to the executive branch, that is the council of the ministers, by the legislature, that is the parliament, is giving. We can say that the parliament is providing certain powers to the executive. The executive is nothing but the council of ministers. This is what we say the delegation of the power. Delegated legislation. It refers to the powers which are granted to the executive branch by the legislature, right, to make laws on specific matters. This form of legislation allows for flexibility and efficiency in addressing detailed administrative and technical issues without requiring primary legislation. Now, we have few constitutional provisions on delegated legislation. Article 73 provides for the executive power of the Union, which extends to making rules for the purpose of carrying out any law made by the Parliament. We already know that the Parliament articles which are related to Parliament starts from 79 to 122. These are the articles which are related to the Parliament. Now, what is Article 73? Executive can make any rules. The executive can make rules to implement the laws. This is to implement. The executive can make rules to implement laws. For the implementation of the laws of the Parliament. Article 162 is similar provision for the states. So 73 plus 89 is 162 is related to the delegated legislation. This is very important because we have MCQs like what are the articles which are related to the state legislature. This article is not related to the state legislature because this is Advocate General. This is related to executive, the delegation of the powers for the executive, right? So this belongs to delegation of the powers to the executive. In order to the executive, the state executive, in order to make certain laws, it has the executive, in order to implement certain laws, it can make rules. This is what delegated legislation. Article 73 is delegation with respect to the union government, and Article 162 is related to the state government, right? These are the articles which are related to delegation of the power. Then separation of the power is Article 7. Here we have to mention the concurrent list, where both the parties, that is the state government as well as the central government, can make laws, right? Now we have Schedule 7. Article 246 is related to Schedule 7. List 2 is state list and list 3 is the concurrent list. Here we have the subjects on which the parliament and the state legislature can legislate. Delegated legislation often pertains to matters in the concurrent list where both legislate. Delegated legislation is related to concurrent list. Article 356. When the president rule is imposed in the state, the governor is going to report the government cannot be carried in accordance to the constitution. Here, therefore, the state government's functions are being undertaken by the president, right? The state government function is undertaken by the president, and a law-making power of the state is being provided to the parliament. Here also, the power is being transferred to someone else for a temporary period, right? This is what we have delegated legislation. Now we are seeing a question over here. We need to examine the increasing power of Prime Minister in India. We have 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Can be included over here when there is a majority. in the parliament. When there is a greater majority in the parliament, the legislature's control over the executive is being hampered, and each laws are not going through much scrutiny. This is what we can include. How does the prime minister become more powerful? So we can see that when he is having a greater majority, when he is having a majority in the house, that too, both the houses, right? Political dominance, strong support within the party, and coalition also, even if it is a coalition also, whether it is a party or it is a coalition, he is, or the prime minister is having a strong support. So this strong support is what we call it as political dominance, right? Centralization of the authority. Prime ministers have been increasingly centralized in the decision making within the PMO office, bypassing the cabinet structures. And the prime minister is powerful when he is having political dominance. Then what and all we have? We have cabinet, we have council of ministers also, right? Here we say when the powers are concentrated to one member, this is the centralization. So centralization of authority. Centralization of authority. This is related to the cabinet, right? Political dominance is related to the party's dominance, and we also have coalition support when they are offering a great support. Now let us see the centralization of the authority. Over the time, we have the prime ministers have increasingly centralized in the decision making. The centralization of the decision making, cabinet is for decision making, right? Within the PMO, bypassing the cabinet, traditional cabinet structure to expedite policy implementation, majority in the parliament. More control over the legislative outcomes, passing of the bills and reforms. Media and public perception. We are going to include media, and then internationally we are going to have foreign policy. So the media and public perception. Prime Minister often utilizes the media and public appearance effectively to shape the public opinion, thereby consolidating their political influence. Foreign policy. The Prime Ministers play a crucial role in shaping India's foreign policy, representing the country at the global stage, making strategic decisions. Now, what are few criticisms? The democratic checks and balances are not being able to carry it out, right? Checks and balances between the executive and the legislature, and legislature is being hampered over here, right? The cabinet functioning is also disturbed. Opposition and dissent, when they are having majority in the political party, the opposition and the dissent are having lesser viewpoints, and policy alternatives are not being able to implement properly. Democratic checks and balances. Critics argue that concentrated power in the Prime Minister's hand can undermine the democratic checks and balances, reducing the parliamentary oversight and accountability. So, the Parliament's oversight and accountability has been removed. Cabinet functioning. There are concerns that the centralized decision making may weaken the role of cabinet. It is weakening the role of the cabinet, the diminishing collective responsibility and deliberative processes. Opposition and the dissent. Centralized power limit the space for the opposition and even constructive opposition, you could mention, politically stifling diverse viewpoints and policy alternatives. Accountability. With increased power comes greater responsibility, and that there are concerns with respect to accountability when decisions are highly centralized and they lack a broader consultation. Example, you can write the Form Laws 2020 which lacked public consultation. A right Formulas 2020 example, but however, it was withdrawn due to a great dissent by the public. Now we have few constitutional and legal provisions. Article 74 is where the advice rendered by the Prime Minister and Council of Minister is binding to the President, underscoring the importance of Prime Minister role in executive decision making. Judicial oversight. While the judiciary provides checks and balances through judicial review, its scope of matters in the executive and the legislative actions are limited. Amendments and evolution. Constitutional amendments and legal interpretations have changed the evolving role of Prime Minister, adapting to changing political dynamics. Now we have a conclusion. Prime Minister's increasing power can lead to effective governance and decisive leadership. It also raises concern about the democratic accountability, institutional balance, and scope for pluralistic decision making. Balancing the strong leadership with constitutional integrity and democratic values remain crucial for ensuring the concentration of power does not undermine India's democratic fabric. Ongoing debate and reforms are essential to mitigate the risks with the excessive centralization of authority and to strengthen the democratic governance in India. Now, the last question for today. Critically examine the increasing power of center and arbitrary reduction in the powers of the state government. Right. First, we discussed about the increasing powers of the Prime Minister. Now, the powers of the, apart from Prime Minister, we are going from the center's power has been increasing and there is a reduction in the state government. We have to discuss and how it is affecting Indian federalism. We need to mention the relevant articles, Supreme Court judgments, amendments to the Indian Constitution. First of all, the center state legislative powers is mentioned in Article 246 of the Constitution in the 7th schedule. Constitutional provisions and federal structure. List subjects under the three lists, that is the union list, state list, and the concurrent list, delineating legislative powers between the union and the state government. Right. We have two articles, Article 246 and Article 256. A new article, right? Distributes, this is related to, you can also include financial, um, where we have the Finance Commission. 256, we have first, let us see, Article 246. The distribution of the legislative powers between the Parliament and the state legislature based on the 7th schedule. Article 256 is where it empowers the centre to give directions to the state governments in matters where the Parliament has legislative authority, emphasizing cooperative federalism. The centre can give directions. So we have to mention that the centre is giving directions to the state government. The central government is providing certain directions to the state government in matters where the parliament is having. So we say that the parliaments are having authority in certain matters. For example, implementation of Janani Suraksha Yojana, which is 100% central sector scheme, right? So here the state legislature must follow the directions which are provided by the central government to cooperative federalism. We can also include Niti Aayog. Center state, we have Niti Aayog, right? Now, what are the factors which are affecting the centralization, or what are the factors which are contributing to the centralization? Is because there is a financial dependence. The states are relying on the grants and the funds from the central government. It influences the policy decisions and implementation. Administrative control. The central government agencies and institutions exert significant influence over the state policies through administrative mechanisms. Emergencies 356. The center assumes the control of the state governance, implementing the state autonomy. Supreme Court judgments and federalism. S.R. Bommai case versus Union of India 1994. The Supreme Court upheld the federal structure of India, emphasizing the imposition of the president's rule in the states should be the last resort, respecting the autonomy of the states. Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, 1973. Here we have the doctrine of basic structure, which ensures that alterations to the federal character of the constitution require a careful scrutiny and cannot be done arbitrarily. Alterations to the federal character. So the federal character, the parliamentary character, sorry, alterations to the federal character requires a careful scrutiny and it cannot be done arbitrarily. You already know 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act centralized powers during emergency. Constitutional amendments, I think only one amendment which is relevant for this, and implications of uh, for the Indian federalism is democratic deficit. The center is having the autonomy. Sorry, the state is having the autonomy and this autonomy is being eroded by the center. Balance, there needs to be a balance, right? Now we'll see what is democratic deficit. Centralization lead to perceived democratic deficit, reducing the responsiveness of the government to the local needs and preferences. State autonomy is being eroded. Centralization erodes the state autonomy and affecting their ability to legislate and implement policies that cater for regional aspirations and challenges. We have balancing act. While cooperative federalism fosters coordination, unilateral actions that reduce the state powers risk undermining the spirit of federalism and cooperative governance. We have conclusion. The increasing centralization of the power and arbitrary reduction in the powers of the state government challenge the principles of federalism enshrined in the Constitution. While certain centralization is necessary for coordination and national unity, it must be balanced with respect for the state autonomy, diversity, democratic principles. The role of constitutional provisions, Supreme Court judgments uphold federalism, and ongoing debates are crucial in shaping a balanced federal structure that respects both national interests and regional aspirations. Efforts to strengthen cooperative federalism while preserving the state autonomy remain essential for sustaining the India's diverse and pluralistic democratic governance framework. I think we have another question left. Yeah. Why do we have a cabinet form of government? Right. Due to the following historical reasons and the influence of the British colonial rule. Historical reasons and influence of the British colonial rule. We have a cabinet form of the government is colonial rule because India was under the British for 200 years. During this time, British government established a parliamentary form of the government which included the cabinet system. The British model of the governance significantly influenced the framers of the Indian Constitution. Government of India Acts 1858, Indian Councils Act 1861, Indian Councils Act 1892 and 1909. First we have 1857 revolt, right? Then we have the 1858 Government of India Act. The next things how we should remember is 1. If you add 1 for 5, 61. Whereas you have 9 is for 2, 92. And then 09. So 18, 18, 19. If it is 09, it must be 19, right? This is how we have to remember somehow. 58, 61, 92, and then we have 1909. We have 3 acts which are for the called as the Indian Councils Act. One act is Government of India Act. Next we have 1919, 1935 and 1947 is Independence Act. 1919 is Government of India, right? We have to mention all these acts. It is necessary to mention all these acts. Yes. So let us discuss one by one. Government of India Act. Transfer the control of the India from the East India Company. Here the British Crown, we got this parliamentary form of the government from the British government, from the British Crown, not from the East India Company. Therefore, when the acts where the East India Company was left and British Crown was present, those acts are of very important. So the Government of India Act of 1858, it transferred the control of India from the East India Company to the British Crown. The Act introduced a more structured form of administration. Indian Councils Act 1861, 1892 and 1909 is MM. MNM, you can remember 9, right? Same as repeating is MC. This first is MM and then MC. Okay, so Morley Minto. We have this as Morley Minto. Here we have Montague Chelmsford. Montague Chelmsford reforms. Limited. Now, Indian Councils Act, we had the limited Indian representation. Indians were participating in the governance. But the Government of India Act had introduced a diarchy system. We have diarchy in the sense elected Indian ministers and appointed British officials. Indians are elected and reserved subjects, and then the transferred subjects is where we have diarchy. Right. Here, the establishment of an all India federation and provincial autonomy, thereby laying the foundation of the Indian parliamentary system and responsible government, is coming in 1935 only. Relevant constitutional provisions is Article 74, which the Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister to the aid and advice of the President. Article 75, the Prime Minister and a Prime Minister is appointed by the President. The Council of Ministers are also appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Council of Ministers hold office during the pleasure of the President. The Council of Ministers are responsible for the Parliament. A member of the Council of Ministers must be a member of Council of Ministers must be a member of the Parliament. Sorry, 6 months, not member, 6 months. Before 6 months. Article 78 is the duty of the Prime Minister to furnish the information to the President. 7th schedule details the distribution of the powers and functions between the Union and the states, which is crucial for understanding the functioning of the federal system in India. Already known 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act is for supremacy of the Prime Minister and the central government. 44th Constitutional Amendment Act is balance between the President and the Parliament. Now, S.R. Bommai case is related to federalism. Federal structure. The President's rule. It is related to the President's rule. 1994. S.R. Bommai case is related to the President's Rule 1994. Affirm the importance of the federal structure and the role of the state governments, underscoring the federal principles of the government. We also have the Keshwananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala 1973. The basic structure doctrine, which ensures that the fundamental framework of the constitution, including the parliamentary system of the government, cannot be altered. Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narang. Address the role of Prime Minister and electoral malpractices. Role of the Prime Minister and electoral malpractices, reinforcing the principles of democratic governance. Cabinet form of the India has its roots in the British colonial administration and subsequent constitutional developments. Government of India Act 1935 was significant precursor to the current system, and Indian Constitution further enshrined this form of governance through various articles, amendments, and judicial interpretations. This system ensures a responsible and representative government, balancing power between the executive and the legislature.